So that's pretty much the end of the middle years. So we've covered the history of the HDF project from the beginning to the present. And now let's look at the future. It's relatively easy to come up with a duration for the early years and for the middle years. It's quite a bit harder to do that for the future because who knows how long the future is going to be. Nevertheless, I've divided the future into two parts, which I'll call the near future and just the future. We'll start with the near future. In the near term, we're not looking so much for dramatic changes as we are for just doing things better. We want to become better at what we already do, and through that to lay a better foundation to attain our mission of providing high-quality support and becoming sustainable. There are four parts to this. We want to change the company from a technology-driven company to a market-driven company. I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. We want to improve the quality of our product, of our open source product. We want to expand and improve our ability to help our customers. And part of that is to get better at doing many of the things that we already do and perhaps even build expertise in a few new areas. This picture captures an important aspect of where we want to go as a company, namely to broaden the base of supporters of HDF, hopefully reaching a level of acceptance for HDF that will ultimately guarantee sustainability. In the 1950s, someone developed this technology diffusion model. The idea is that technologies typically begin by serving small markets of technology enthusiasts and visionaries, and then as a technology matures and proves itself, more pragmatic users will adopt it, and later more conservative communities will adopt it. The pragmatists and conservatives make up a much larger market than the enthusiasts and the visionaries, and to become sustainable, it's very useful to reach these broader markets. Well, we're a technology-driven company with a few customers, and those customers could be thought of as visionaries and enthusiasts. People who are willing to take some risk to be able to address their data challenges in new and different ways. But in the future, we want to broaden the base of users of HDF. Strategically, we think this will help us not only become more sustainable, but it will make us better at what we do and enable us to help many more people and organizations that have to deal with data challenges. In 1990, while observing the dot-com boom, Jeffrey Moore described what he saw as a problem with the technology diffusion model. Namely, what he observed was that many technologies start out with great promise, but they never make it from the visionary side into the mainstream. The model itself describes a little gap between each of the sectors, but those gaps are considered small in the classic model. Moore would argue that the gap between the visionaries and the pragmatists is much larger. It's a chasm, in fact, he says, and many tech products never make it across the chasm. He calls it the valley of death for high-tech products. Well, we feel that HDF is really primarily currently on the left side of that chasm, and that we need to figure out how to cross the chasm as well. Moore describes several strategies for doing this. For example, he says, make sure that the cost of entry is low. Don't assume that adopters will be willing to go to a lot of effort or expense to adopt your technology. Thus, focus on quality, ease of use, low cost, and so forth. Think about the whole product, he says, not just the core technology. And by the whole product, what he means is that pragmatists need your technology to fit in with all of the other technologies that they use. So we need to make sure that our technology integrates well with those other technologies. Having HDF play well, for example, with databases, and with applications like MATLAB is very important in this regard. Moore says to focus also, as you're developing capabilities within your product, on capabilities that directly benefit users, not just on cool features that have limited utility. And he also says, don't try to move your product into a whole lot of different markets at one time, even though you can see a whole lot of different market areas that might adopt your product. He calls this the D-Day strategy. Focus on one beachhead. Put your energies into winning over that market, and then explore others. So these are the kinds of things we're thinking about as we lay our foundation in the near future. Okay, now I will finish up by focusing on the longer term future as we sort of envision it. I'm going to focus on two things: technological challenges and institutional strategies. I'll start with technological challenges. In a wonderful paper called The Digital Universe, published a couple of years ago, it was posited that based on current trends, in the next 15 years, the number of bits in the digital universe will surpass Avogadro's number. We're all aware of the tremendous growth in the availability of data, and we're also aware that a lot of that data is coming out of scientific and engineering applications, and has some of it has tremendous value. So how do we deal with that data? How do we preserve it? How do we access it? How do we make sense of it? So that's obviously one of the challenges that we hope to be in the middle of as we move forward with HDF. In the fall of 2010, the Jaguar computer at Oak Ridge National Lab is the world's fastest computer. It has 224,000 cores, and it can perform almost 2 quadrillion floating point operations per second. A number of applications on the Jaguar system use HDF5, and potentially many more could use it. So when your data is being produced collectively and simultaneously on hundreds of thousands of cores, how do you read and write that data efficiently and meaningfully? We have to be able to deal with issues like these if we really want HDF5 to serve the needs of the users of these systems. And while we're just beginning to adapt to petascale systems, the Department of Energy and others are beginning to set their sights on exascale systems. We've just started 2 projects with DOE funding and led by Quincy Koziol in the HDF group, and also working with several DOE labs that will explore these challenges in managing data on exascale systems. So as we look towards the future, we definitely see this as an important research thrust within the HDF group. So not only do we need to deal with the massive amounts of data and the different kinds of systems that will be producing the data, but also we expect a continued growth in the kinds of data that we'll be dealing with. These pictures illustrate some of the different kinds of data that we've needed to be able to make sure that HDF could support getting ourselves to now in the future. What are some of the new kinds of data, the new kinds of uses of data that we'll need to be able to support? If we go back to that meeting report from 1987 and we look at reasons for having an all-encompassing hierarchical object-oriented format, the second reason was it should be to encompass every conceivable future type of data, and that continues to be an important part of our goal going forward. At the same time that we're dealing with these other challenges, it's important not to lose our focus on the data preservation issues. One thing that is absolutely clear is that the software, and hopefully to a lesser extent the format are going to evolve. As other technologies change, our technology has to change along with them. So we talk about that evolution in the context of maintaining compatibility, especially across generations as we do it. So we've been developing sort of guidelines for ourselves, and we need to do this not just for ourselves but for our users, that will keep that evolution under control. We need to continue to develop processes that will ensure cross-generational compatibility, so that if someone stores their data in the software and the format of the year 2010, that they will be able to access that format and hopefully even use that software generations later. It's been said somewhat cynically that standards are wonderful, and that's why we have so many different ones. But seriously, we believe that it is important to promote standardization and interoperability. We want to foster standard uses of HDF5 so that more and more diverse groups can share and integrate their data. There are a number of successful examples of that. HDF-EOS is one of the really successful ones, we feel. CGNS, the Nexus project. We hope that BioHDF will become a standard. So we think that that's really important. We also would like to work on making HDF, especially HDF5, a national and international standard, and we feel that that's an important building block to preservation. So standards is an area that we hope to really put a lot of emphasis on going into the future. And that sort of is a good segue into institutional strategies. So what are we thinking about in terms of institutional strategies going forward? First and foremost, we want to continue to be mission-driven. We chose to be a nonprofit in order to ensure that we could remain mission-driven. We're not locked into that model, but whatever model we choose, we want to continue to focus on supporting the people who are committing their data to HDF, and those also who will need access to their data for the long term. Another institutional strategy for us is the open source principle. We're committed to the open source model for the basic format and the software. This doesn't mean that proprietary products couldn't be built on HDF. We want whatever intellectual property choices we make, and even our business model, to allow that to happen. But we believe that open source software has many advantages, especially to the people that we're trying to serve. It lowers the barrier to basic access to the data. The software is free, readily accessible, and of course we need to make sure that it's easy to use as well. It also improves the ability of our users to understand the software itself and to take the software and adapt it to their needs. On the intellectual property side, that's a sort of delicate issue that we're still trying to learn how to deal with, but we want to make sure that applications built on HDF are not overly encumbered by intellectual property requirements. In terms of the benefits, to us, being open source helps ensure that HDF will have a wide community involvement, and that's terribly important to us and to our mission. Our users constantly test HDF, they find bugs, they identify ways to improve it. They just help us make it better. They've also found countless new uses of HDF, and we expect that they'll continue to do that. And also, the community promotes HDF far beyond what our little group could do. So in that sense, they're a marketing arm for HDF. Another institutional principle we believe in is that there should be one keeper of the format and the software. Most open source software projects subscribe to the idea that anyone can contribute to testing the software and making it better. And we certainly believe in that premise, but only to a point. Both HDF4 and HDF5 are complex formats. The software itself is even more complex, and that complexity limits the extent to which we can incorporate contributions from users, especially into the core products. We encourage contributions, but we feel that the quality of the software would be at risk if we didn't maintain a fairly strict control over those contributions. Another reason we want to have control is to avoid fragmentation. If you don't have the last word on exactly what constitutes HDF4 and HDF5, then separate versions could emerge from different communities, and much of what makes HDF4 and HDF5 so useful would ultimately be lost. This isn't to say that the central authority has to always be the HDF group. It's entirely possible that a different mechanism could emerge over time that would manage the maintenance and evolution of HDF. Another principle that we believe in is long-term institutional support. In order to carry out our mission, we feel that we need to create an independent, self-sustaining institution. As we said earlier, we started this out by defining our mission and vision, by establishing an organization that's mission-driven, and also by trying to establish a mindset that values accessibility to the data and to the software for the long term. To achieve long-term institutional stability, we feel we need to do at least these three things. We need to find a business model that builds assets and is sustainable. We need to find the right intellectual property strategy that balances openness with stewardship. And we need to develop sustainable assets in terms of knowledge, people, and finances. We're not there on any of these counts, but this is where we want to be. Perhaps our biggest challenge institutionally is our business model. Our current model provides income almost exclusively from services, and that's a model that so far doesn't seem to scale very well. Clearly, profits on the sale of the basic software are out of the picture. But fortunately, a lot of new and creative open source business models are emerging, and there's probably a lot that we can learn from them. The main point to be made here is that in the future we're going to have to focus on finding a business model that enables us to be sustainable. Finally, as an institutional strategy, we realize that maintaining a highly centralized operation for the long term is probably not ideal and probably not even viable. We have a growing base of users and supporters who understand the value of HDF and are ready and willing to contribute with us to evolving and sustaining HDF, as well as to supporting HDF users. The collective energy and wisdom of this community is enormous, and we're just plain foolish not to take advantage of it. Furthermore, we owe it to these folks to let them help sustain HDF. I'm not just talking about programmers out there with clever ideas about HDF and with the time to contribute. They're obviously tremendously valuable, but I'm also talking about institutional supporters, especially in industry and the government. We envision consortia of organizations that understand the value of keeping alive and well a technology like HDF that helps solve some of our biggest data challenges. Thanks to the web, technologies are already in place to build and manage widely dispersed groups of people working together with a common goal. These technologies will only get better in the future. But we're also seeing government initiatives such as the National Science Foundation's Scientific Software Innovations Institute that could provide the institutional support that's needed. We need to learn how to use these technologies, these people, and these institutional opportunities to expand the HDF group into a virtual organization that embraces the resources and wisdom of the people and organizations that I've been talking about for the past hour. For they are really the ones who make HDF what it is. Thank you very much.